My own son watched me suffer a stroke and did nothing for exactly 5 minutes. He stood over my desk checking his watch while my brain was starved of oxygen. He thought those 5 minutes would make me a vegetable. He thought they would hand him the keys to my logistics empire without a fight. He was wrong. Those 5 minutes did not break me. They gave me the time to plan the most painful lesson of his life. A lesson that would cost him his freedom, his fortune, and his pride. Before we dive into this story of cold-blooded betrayal and colder revenge, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you think family loyalty should be earned, not expected. It was raining against the glass of my corner office on the 42nd floor. The kind of Chicago rain that chills you to the bone. But the cold I felt did not come from the weather outside. It came from the spreadsheet glowing on my screen. $5 million. Gone. Funneled into a shell company that I knew belonged to my son Bradley. My chest tightened as the realization hit me. I reached for the phone to call my lawyer, but my hand refused to move. It was as if my arm belonged to someone else. The phone clattered to the floor, echoing in the silence. Then the room tilted violently. I tried to shout his name, but my tongue felt like lead in my mouth. I collapsed onto the carpet, my vision blurring at the edges. The pain was sharp and immediate, like a vice crushing my skull. That is when the heavy oak door opened. Bradley walked in, wearing that $3,000 Italian suit I paid for. He stopped. He saw me lying on the floor. He saw the panic in my eyes. A normal son would run to his father. A normal son would scream for help and dial 911 with trembling hands. Bradley did neither. He stopped and looked at me. Then he looked at the open laptop screen. He saw the spreadsheet. He knew that I knew. The look on his face shifted from surprise to something terrifyingly calm. He did not reach for his phone. He calmly walked over to my mahogany desk and sat in my chair. My chair. He looked at his gold Rolex and waited. 1 minute passed. I gasped for air, begging him with my eyes to make the call. I could feel my life slipping away. 2 minutes. He opened my top drawer and rummaged through it, until he found the corporate seal. It was the heavy brass stamp that authorized all major asset transfers, the symbol of my authority for 40 years. He weighed it in his hand and then slipped it into his pocket. 3 minutes. The numbness was spreading to my chest now. He finally looked down at me and smiled. It was not a sad smile. It was a smile of relief. Rest now, old man, he whispered softly. The kingdom needs a young king. He waited 2 more minutes, watching me struggle, until my eyes began to roll back. By the time the paramedics burst in, the corporate seal was gone, the laptop was closed, and my son was playing the part of the grieving heir perfectly. As the darkness finally took me, I made a silent vow. If I wake up from this, you will wish you had let me die. The sterile smell of antiseptic was the first thing to hit me, followed by the rhythmic beeping of a machine that confirmed I was not dead yet. I tried to sit up, but my body refused to obey. It felt as though I was trapped inside a concrete statue. My right side was completely numb, and my throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I could see the ceiling tiles, counting them one by one just to keep my mind from screaming. Then the heavy door swung open again. It was not a doctor. It was Bradley, and he had brought a vulture with him. I recognized the man immediately as Mr. Reeves, a lawyer known in Chicago for helping wealthy heirs bypass ethical hurdles. They did not ask how I was feeling. They did not check my vitals. Reeves simply pulled a document from his briefcase and laid it on the tray table across my chest. It was a durable power of attorney granting Bradley full control over my finances, my real estate, and my medical decisions. The text blurred before my eyes, but the intent was crystal clear. They were stripping me of my life while I was still warm. I tried to shake my head to make a sound of protest, but all that came out was a low, guttural moan. Reeves looked at Bradley and shrugged, indicating that perhaps I was too far gone to sign. But Bradley was not a man to give up on a fortune so easily. He leaned over the bed railing, his face inches from mine. To anyone passing by in the hallway, it looked like a loving son comforting his ailing father. But his whisper was cold enough to freeze the blood in my veins. He told me that if I did not sign that paper, he would instruct the doctors to remove my feeding tube. He said he would let me starve to death in this room and tell the world it was what I wanted. I looked into his eyes and saw no hesitation. He meant every word. Survival instinct kicked in. I had to live if I wanted to make him pay. My right arm was dead weight, a useless slab of meat at my side. Bradley saw this and smirked, placing the pen into my left hand. My left hand had never been my dominant hand, but it was the only part of me that could still move. I gripped the pen with trembling fingers. It felt foreign and clumsy. I pressed the tip to the paper and forced my hand to move. The signature was jagged and ugly looking. Nothing like the firm, elegant script I had used to sign billion-dollar contracts for 40 years. It was the scrawl of a desperate man. But it was there. Arthur J. Vance. Bradley snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry. He checked the signature, gave a satisfied nod to the lawyer, and turned his back on me. As they walked out the door, I heard Bradley stop a passing nurse. He spoke loudly, making sure his voice carried down the corridor. He told her that his father was completely gone mentally. He said I was confused, incoherent, and had lost all capacity to make decisions. He told her to increase my sedation because I was agitated. As the nurse came in with a syringe, I closed my eyes. Let them think I am broken. Let them think I am finished. A signature made under duress with the wrong hand is the first knot in the noose I am going to weave for my son. I expected the ambulance to take me back to my sanctuary on Lakeshore Drive with its view of the skyline I helped build. Instead, the vehicle turned into the service entrance of Bradley's estate. My heart sank as we bypassed the main mansion and rattled down a gravel path toward the old guest cottage that had not been renovated since the 90s. Bradley opened the door, and the smell hit me instantly. It was a mixture of mildew and rot, the scent of something long forgotten. I tried to protest, to demand why I was being shoved into this hovel, but my voice was still a broken croak. Bradley just checked his phone and dropped the bomb casually. He told me my penthouse was already sold. He said the market was hot and he liquidated the asset to cover my medical bills. It was a lie. My insurance covered everything. He had sold my home, my library, my life of 30 years in less than a week, just to erase my footprint from the city. He dumped me onto a sagging mattress that smelled of dust. Before I could even attempt to sit up, Vanessa breezed into the room. She looked out of place in this filth, wearing a white cashmere dress and heels that clicked sharply on the warped wooden floor. She did not bring soup or medicine. She brought a basket. With a smile that did not reach her dead eyes, she reached into my jacket pocket. Her fingers were cold as she pried my cell phone from my weak grip. I tried to pull back, but I had no strength. She took it. Then she reached for my wallet. I felt a surge of panic. That wallet had the photo of my late wife and the emergency cash I kept for a rainy day. Vanessa tutted at me like one would scold a naughty child. She said the doctor insisted on zero stimulation. She claimed that phone calls and credit card statements would only spike my blood pressure. She said she was doing this for my own good, to protect my fragile heart. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. She dropped my lifeline into her basket and patted my cheek. Her ring scratched my skin. She told me to sleep and that they would check on me eventually. She turned and walked out, joining Bradley, who was waiting in the doorway. He did not look back. He just closed the heavy wooden door. I waited for the simple click of a latch. Instead, I heard the heavy metallic slide of a deadbolt being thrown from the outside. Then another lock. Then silence. I stared at the peeling wallpaper and the bars on the small window that I had never noticed before. The realization washed over me colder than the rain outside. I was not a guest here. I was not a father recovering from an illness. I was an inmate. They had stripped me of my home, my money, and my ability to communicate with the outside world. They thought this damp room would be my tomb. They thought I would rot here quietly while they spent my fortune. But as I lay there, listening to the wind rattle the loose window pane, I felt something stir inside me. It was not fear. It was a cold, hard rage that burned hot enough to melt steel. I closed my eyes and began to count the floorboards. If this was to be my prison, I would memorize every inch of it before I broke out. The new addition to my prison cell was not a piece of furniture. It was Matilda. A woman built like a linebacker with eyes as cold as the Chicago wind. Bradley had not hired a caregiver. He had hired a warden. Her uniform was white, but her demeanor was pure military grade. She did not speak to me. She did not ask if I was comfortable. She simply existed to ensure I remained a harmless invalid. Her primary weapon was a small paper cup containing 2 blue pills. Thorazine. A dosage high enough to sedate a horse, let alone a 72-year-old man recovering from a stroke. Every 4 hours, like clockwork, she would march to my bedside. Open, she would command in a voice that brooked no argument. I knew what those pills were. They were chemical handcuffs designed to keep my mind in a fog, to make me the drooling, incoherent vegetable Bradley claimed I was. If I refused, she would simply force my jaw open, or switch to injections, which I could not fake. So I adapted. I played the role my son had written for me. I let my head loll to the side. I let my hands tremble violently. When she tipped the cup into my mouth, I swallowed the water, but used my tongue to tuck the bitter pills into the pocket of my cheek. It was a trick I learned from a union strike leader back in the 80s, and it saved my life. The moment Matilda turned her broad back to update my chart, I would cough into my hand or pretend to wipe my mouth. With a sleight of hand that would make a magician proud, the pills went from my mouth into the soil of a dying fern on the windowsill. That poor plant was wilting faster every day, likely poisoned by the toxins meant for my brain. While the fern died, my mind sharpened. I lay there with my eyes closed, listening, observing, and waiting for a crack in the armor. It took 3 days for that crack to appear. It happened on a Tuesday night. Matilda thought I was deep in a drug-induced sleep. She left the heavy oak door cracked open just an inch and stepped into the hallway to answer her phone. I heard a sound I did not expect, coming from a woman made of stone. She was crying. Not soft tears, but the jagged, desperate gasps of someone who is terrified. I dragged my aching body off the mattress and shuffled silently to the door, ignoring the fire in my joints. I pressed my ear to the gap. Her voice was shaking. "Please, you cannot let him take Toby. I am working double shifts. I have the money for the lawyer, almost. Please do not let the court give him full custody. He hits him. I know he hits him." She listened to the person on the other end and then let out a sob that broke my heart, and then immediately mended it with a plan. She was not just a guard. She was a mother, fighting a losing battle against a wealthy, abusive ex-husband. She was desperate. Bradley thought he had hired a loyal dog, but he had actually brought a starving wolf into the house. I limped back to bed and stared at the ceiling. In business, as in war, you do not need to overpower your enemy. You just need to offer them something they cannot refuse. Bradley was paying her a wage. I was going to offer her a future. The television mounted high on the wall was my only connection to the outside world, and that afternoon it became a window into a massacre. I was lying in the semi-darkness when the local news intro played. The headline flashed across the screen in bold red letters. Mass layoffs at Hawthorne Logistics. My heart hammered against my ribs as the camera cut to the familiar brick facade of the headquarters I had built with my own hands. People were streaming out of the main entrance carrying cardboard boxes. They were not strangers. I knew their faces. I knew their spouses' names. I knew which of them had kids in college and which of them were caring for sick parents. There was Tom, the warehouse manager, who had been with me since I had a single truck and a rented garage. He was wiping tears from his eyes with the back of a dirty sleeve. There was Mrs. Higgins from payroll, who sent me a handwritten card every Christmas without fail. She looked lost, standing on the sidewalk, clutching a potted plant as if it were the only thing she had left in the world. 200 people. Bradley had not just fired employees, he had severed the arteries of the company. He was gutting the soul of the business to inflate the bottom line for a quick sale. The reporter said it was a strategic restructuring to cut costs. I knew what it really was. It was a purge. A primal rage surged through me, hot and blinding. I ignored the screaming pain in my stiff joints and dragged myself off the bed. I stumbled toward the heavy wooden door, my bad leg dragging behind me like a dead weight. I reached the door and pounded on it with my good fist. I hit the solid wood until my knuckles split and bled. I tried to scream to demand he stop this madness, but my throat only produced a strangled, raspy sound. I wanted to tear the door down. I wanted to march into his office and strangle him. But I was trapped. I was a helpless spectator, watching my legacy burn. The lock clicked. The door swung open, and I nearly fell forward. Bradley stood there. He was holding a glass of scotch and looked impeccably calm. He looked over my head at the television screen, where the reporter was interviewing a sobbing mechanic. Bradley did not flinch. He did not look ashamed. He looked bored. He stepped into the room and picked up the remote control from the bedside table. He pointed it at the screen, and the image of my weeping friends vanished into blackness. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. He looked down at me, his eyes empty of any warmth. "You are agitated again," he said smoothly, taking a sip of his drink. "You really should not watch the news. It is full of depressing stories. He crouched down so his face was level with mine. Do not worry about them, Dad. They were dinosaurs. Just like you. Expensive, slow, and stuck in the past. We are cleaning house. The rest of your relics will be gone by the end of the month. He stood up and patted his suit jacket. Efficiency is the future. You should be proud. I am finally running this company like a business instead of a charity. He turned and walked out, locking the door behind him, leaving me in the silence of a room that suddenly felt very crowded with the ghosts of the people he had just destroyed. The nights became my gymnasium and my torture chamber. While Matilda snored in the armchair with the rhythm of a freight train, I waged a silent war against my own body. My right leg felt less like a limb and more like a bag of wet cement dragging behind me. The doctors had said recovery would take months of physical therapy, but I did not have months. I had days, maybe less. Every night at exactly 2 a.m, I would slide off the mattress. The drop to the floor was only 2 feet, but it felt like jumping off a cliff. The impact sent shock waves of pain up my spine, but I bit into my pillow to stifle the scream. I could not make a sound. If Matilda woke up, if she saw me trying to move, she would up the dosage of the Thorazine, or worse, tie me down. So I suffered in silence. I used the bed frame to pull myself up. My knuckles turned white as I strained against gravity. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes, but I refused to wipe it away. I focused on one thing, the image of Bradley sitting in my chair. Hatred is a potent fuel. It burns cleaner and longer than hope ever could. For 5 nights I failed. I would get halfway up, only for my knee to buckle, sending me crashing back onto the rug. I would lie there, panting, cursing my weakness, terrified that the noise had woken the warden. But on the 6th night, something changed. A synapse reconnected. A muscle fired. I pulled, I strained, and then, miraculously, I was standing. I swayed like a drunkard in a hurricane, clutching the iron bars of the window for support. My legs trembled violently, threatening to give out at any second, but I locked my knees and forced them to hold. I was standing. For the first time in weeks, I was upright. The triumph was intoxicating, but it was short-lived. I looked out through the grime of the window pane toward the main mansion. The driveway was lit up by floodlights, and a sleek black limousine was idling near the front steps. It was not a car I recognized. Then the front door opened. Bradley stepped out, smiling that oily smile he used when he was closing a deal. He was shaking hands with a man I recognized instantly. Marcus Sterling, the Shark of Chicago. My heart went cold. Sterling did not do dinner parties. He did not do social calls. He acquired distressed companies, stripped them of their assets, and sold the scraps for profit. He was the man I had spent 40 years keeping away from Hawthorne Logistics. Seeing him there, shaking hands with my son, confirmed my worst nightmare. Bradley was not just running the company, he was selling it. He was going to chop up my life's work and sell it for parts before I was even in the ground. I watched them laugh, the steam from their breath rising in the cold night air. They looked like 2 vultures picking over a carcass. The pain in my leg vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline that cleared the fog in my brain completely. I looked at the high fence surrounding the estate. I looked at the dark woods beyond. I was not ready. My body was still broken. My walk was still a shuffle. But looking at Sterling getting into that limo, I knew I had no choice. I could not wait for full recovery. I could not wait for the perfect moment. I had to get out of this room, tonight. If I stayed one more day, there would be no company left to save. I released my grip on the window bars and took my first unsupported step. It was clumsy and ugly, but it was a step. I was leaving. The old iron ventilation grate in the corner of the room was loose. I had noticed it on my second day of captivity, but I never thought it would be the channel that delivered my death sentence. That night, the wind died down and the house settled into a heavy silence. That was when I heard them. Voices carrying through the metal ductwork from the main house directly into my cell. It was a quirk of the old architecture, a direct line from the library where my son was holding court down to the guest cottage where he kept his prisoner. I dragged myself to the corner and pressed my ear against the cold metal. The voices were muffled but distinct. I recognized the low, gravelly baritone of Marcus Sterling immediately. He was not negotiating. He was dictating terms. 50 million, Bradley, he said. That is the offer. Take it or I walk. My heart hammered against my ribs. 50 million was an insult. The fleet alone was worth 80. The real estate was worth another 40. They were talking about selling my life's work for scrap metal prices. Then I heard Bradley. His voice was high, tight, and laced with panic. You said 70, Marcus. We shook on 70. I need 60 just to cover the loans from the guys in Vegas. If I do not pay them by Friday, they are going to do more than just break my legs. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It was not ambition. It was not a strategic pivot. My son had gambled away his inheritance before I was even dead. He was selling Hawthorne Logistics to pay off bookies and loan sharks. He was burning down the cathedral to keep himself warm. I pulled away from the vent. The rage that had been simmering in my gut for weeks suddenly turned into cold, hard resolve. I could not wait for the police. I could not wait for a lawyer. By the time the legal system moved, Sterling would have gutted the company and Bradley would have vanished with the cash. I had to leave. Tonight. I scanned the room. My eyes landed on a stack of medical brochures Matilda had left on the nightstand. Holding the pages together was a simple silver paperclip. To anyone else, it was a piece of stationery. To a man who spent 10 years driving rigs across the country before he ever sat in a boardroom, it was a key. I snatched it up and straightened the wire. My hands were still stiff from the stroke, but my muscle memory was intact. I crawled to the door. The lock was an old brass tumbler, simple and sturdy. I inserted the wire, feeling for the pins. 1 click. 2 clicks. Sweat stung my eyes. My hands spasmed and I dropped the clip. I cursed silently, breathing through the pain, forcing my fingers to obey. I picked it up again. I closed my eyes, visualizing the mechanism. 3 clicks. The cylinder turned. The sound of the deadbolt sliding back was louder than a gunshot in the quiet night. I pushed the door open. The cold night air rushed in, biting my skin. I stepped out onto the gravel path. I was free of the room, but I was standing in the middle of a winter night, wearing nothing but thin pajamas and a stolen coat I grabbed from the hook by the door. I patted my pockets. Empty. No phone, no wallet, no keys. I was a millionaire with 0 cents to his name, standing in the shadow of the empire he built. I pulled the collar up tight and started walking toward the back gate. I was broke and I was freezing, but I was dangerous again. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was not just cold, it was personal. It cut through the thin wool of the stolen coat like a razor blade, seeking out the warmth of my skin and finding none. I made it 3 blocks to a 24-hour ATM inside a bodega that smelled of stale coffee and bleach. This machine was my last hope. My black titanium card had a limit high enough to buy this entire city block. I inserted it with trembling fingers. I punched in the code. A code only I knew, or so I thought. The screen did not dispense cash. It flashed a bright, aggressive red. Transaction denied. Card retained. Please contact your financial institution. I stared at the glowing pixels. A mechanical whirring sound came from the machine as it swallowed my card into its metal belly. Bradley. He had not just locked me in a guest house. He had methodically erased my existence. He had frozen every account, flagged every card, and cut every lifeline. I stood there for a moment, watching my reflection in the dark screen. A tired old man with wild hair and panic in his eyes. I turned and walked out into the snow. I had no money for a taxi, no phone to call a friend. My only option was a memory. 30 years ago, I had a foreman named Miller who ran a garage on the south side. He was a man of honor in a city that had very little of it left. If I could get to him, he would help me. But the south side was miles away, and my right leg was dragging like a sandbag. I started walking. The snow began to fall harder, turning the sidewalk into a treacherous slush of gray ice. The city I built had changed. The landmarks I used to navigate by were gone, replaced by glass condos and trendy coffee shops that were all closed for the night. The streets twisted and turned in ways I did not remember. I was lost. The cold was seeping into my bones, making my joints ache with a fire that almost brought me to my knees. I took a turn down what I thought was 47th Street, but the street sign was missing. The buildings here were boarded up, their windows like hollow eyes staring at my foolishness. I needed a shortcut. I ducked into an alleyway, hoping it would lead to a main avenue. It was a mistake. The alley was a dead end of wet cardboard and overflowing dumpsters. I turned to go back, but the exit was blocked. Shadows detached themselves from the brick walls. 3 of them. They were young, wearing hoodies pulled low over their faces. They did not see Gerald Hawthorne, the logistics tycoon. They saw prey. They saw an old man in expensive pajamas, shivering in a coat that did not fit. One of them stepped forward, and I heard the distinct click of a switchblade opening. They fanned out, cutting off my escape. I backed up until my spine hit the cold metal of a dumpster. I was freezing, exhausted, and cornered. In the dark heart of the city I used to own, the alley was a trap, and I had walked right into it. There is a specific kind of silence that falls before violence occurs, and it descended heavily on that narrow strip of wet pavement. The leader of the pack stepped forward. He was young, with eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. He pointed a serrated knife at my chest. "Give me the watch, old man." He did not ask. He demanded. My hand instinctively covered the gold timepiece on my left wrist. It was a Patek Philippe, a gift from my late wife on our 30th anniversary. On the back, she had engraved a simple message. Time is the only currency that matters. Spend it well. Standing there in the freezing slush, I realized how right she was. My son had stolen my fortune, my company, and my home. But he had not managed to take this. I shook my head. "No," I said, my voice trembling. Not from fear, but from a stubborn pride that refused to die. "Take the coat. Take the shoes. But you are not taking this." The boy laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. He nodded to the thug on my right. The blow came from nowhere. A fist slammed into my jaw, sending a shockwave of pain through my skull. My knees, which were already screaming from the cold, finally gave out. I collapsed into the mud, the freezing slime soaking instantly through my thin pajamas. Before I could try to stand, a heavy boot slammed into my ribs. I curled into a ball, trying to protect the watch, but hands were everywhere, tearing at my clothes. I felt the cold metal band being ripped from my wrist. "Please," I gasped, tasting blood. "Not that. Anything but that." The leader held the watch up to the dim street lamp, inspecting his prize. "Nice," he sneered. "This will feed us for a year." He looked down at me with contempt. "You should have stayed in the nursing home, Grandpa." I lay there in the filth, broken and humiliated. The last tether to my identity was gone. I closed my eyes, waiting for the final kick that would end it all. But it never came. Instead, I heard a sound that did not belong. A heavy, wet thud, like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. Then a scream. I opened my eyes. A shadow had detached itself from the pile of discarded crates near the dumpster. It was massive, a giant of a man wearing a tattered army jacket. He moved with a speed that defied his size. He grabbed the leader by the back of his hoodie and tossed him against the brick wall as if he were a rag doll. The knife clattered to the ground. The other two thugs lunged, but the giant simply stepped forward, swinging a fist like a wrecking ball. One punch. Two punches. Silence. The thugs scrambled to their feet, terrified by this sudden force of nature, and sprinted out of the alley, leaving their prize behind. The giant stood there breathing heavily, his breath pluming in the cold air. He bent down and picked up the watch from the mud. He wiped it carefully on his dirty sleeve. Then he turned to me. Under the grime and the beard, I saw eyes that burned with an intense, dangerous intelligence. It was Leo Vasquez. The giant did not offer me a hand to help me up. Not yet. He stood there under the flickering yellow street lamp, breathing hard like a steam engine. He looked at the gold watch in his massive, callous palm. I watched his eyes narrow as he tilted the metal to catch the light. He was reading the inscription. To Gerald, with love. The air in the alley shifted instantly. A moment ago he was my savior. Now he looked like my executioner. He looked down at me, and his lip curled in disgust. "Hawthorne," he growled. The name sounded like a curse coming from his throat. He took a heavy step toward me, and the ground seemed to shake. "You are one of them, aren't you? One of those blood-sucking vultures from the tower." His grip on the watch tightened until I thought the gold links would snap. "I saved your life, old man, but if you were part of that family, I will throw you back to the wolves myself." My heart hammered against my bruised ribs. I knew that look in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had been chewed up and spit out by the corporate machine I had built. If I told him I was Gerald Hawthorne, the chairman, he would likely finish what the muggers started. I was defenseless, freezing and bleeding. I had to lie. I had to become someone else to survive. "No," I wheezed, pushing myself up on one elbow. "My name is Jerry. I was a dispatcher, 30 years. They fired me yesterday, for being too old." I pointed a shaking finger at the watch in his hand. I took it from the executive suite on my way out. It is my severance package. I figured they owe me at least that much for a lifetime of service. Silence stretched between us, heavy and cold. Leo looked at the watch, then at me. He saw the pajamas. He saw the desperation. He saw a man who had been discarded just like him. He did not see a billionaire. He saw a victim. The anger in his eyes cooled, replaced by a grim understanding. He looked at the expensive Patek Philippe one last time and then shoved it into his own pocket. He laughed, a short barking sound that echoed off the brick walls. "You stole it. Good. They owe us more than a watch." He spat a wad of phlegm onto the dirty snow right next to my boot. "If you stole from a Hawthorne, then you are a friend of mine." He finally reached down and hauled me to my feet with one hand, as if I weighed nothing. "Come on, Jerry. You cannot stay here. The rats come out after midnight, and they are hungrier than the ones in suits. Follow me." The building was not a house. It was a scar on the face of the neighborhood. Leo led me down a set of crumbling concrete stairs into a basement that smelled of wet wool, stale sweat, and hopelessness. This was the community center he had mentioned. To me, it looked like purgatory. I had spent 40 years looking down on this city from a glass tower, believing I understood the economy. I thought poverty was a statistic on a spreadsheet, a line item to be managed. Standing there in my muddy pajamas, shivering next to a boiler that groaned like a dying beast, I realized I knew absolutely nothing. Dozens of people were huddled on cots or sleeping on flattened cardboard boxes. Men, women, children. Some were coughing with a dry, hacking sound that echoed off the cinderblock walls. Others just stared at the ceiling with eyes that had gone blank long ago. I felt a wave of shame so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. These were the people my son called surplus population. These were the people I had ignored while I was busy expanding my empire. Leo did not walk through the room like a guest. He walked like a shepherd. As we moved toward the back, people reached out to him. He had a kind word for an old woman clutching a rosary and a firm handshake for a man who looked like he was going through withdrawal. He was not just a brute who could crush a skull in an alley. He was the heartbeat of this place. He led me to a folding table and pushed me down onto a metal chair. "Eat," he said, sliding a styrofoam bowl toward me. It was soup, if you could call it that. Lukewarm broth with a few floating vegetables that looked like they had been rescued from the bottom of a crate. In my previous life, I would have sent this back to the kitchen and had the chef fired. Tonight, I lifted the plastic spoon with trembling hands and ate as if it were a Michelin star meal. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the chill of the alley. I watched Leo moving among the rows of cots, handing out blankets and bottles of water. He gave his own jacket to a shivering teenager who looked no older than 16. It made no sense. This man lived in violence but practiced charity. He hated the name Hawthorne with a fire that could burn down a city, yet he had saved my life. I scraped the bottom of the bowl and waited for him to return. When he finally sat down across from me, he looked exhausted. The rage from the alley was gone, replaced by a heavy weariness. He pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his pocket, but put it back when he saw a mother nursing a baby nearby. I cleared my throat. The question was dangerous. It could end my safety right here and now, but I had to know the source of the poison. "You saved me, Leo," I said, keeping my voice low. "You fought for me. But back in that alley, when you read the inscription on the watch, you looked like you wanted to kill me. You said the name Hawthorne was a curse. Why?" Leo stiffened. His eyes darkened, and for a moment I thought he might reach across the table and strangle me. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "Because that family did not just fire me, Jerry. They took my life. They turned me into a criminal to save a few dollars on brake pads. The community center basement was quiet, except for the hum of the old boiler. Leo stared at his hands, which were clasped tightly together on the folding table. They were the hands of a man who had built things and destroyed things, and right now they were trembling with a suppressed rage that frightened me more than his violence in the alley. He took a deep breath and began to speak, and his voice was not the growl of a monster, but the broken whisper of a man who had lost everything. He told me he had been the head driver for Hawthorne Logistics for 15 years. He had driven every route from the icy roads of Alaska to the scorching highways of Texas without a single accident. He was proud of his safety record. He was proud of his truck. But 2 years ago, everything changed. He was assigned to truck number 404, an old rig that had been flagged for maintenance 3 times in 1 month. Each time the maintenance request was denied by management, citing budget cuts. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. 2 years ago. That was when I had my first minor heart attack and stepped back, leaving Bradley in charge of operations. Leo described that night with a clarity that made my blood run cold. He was hauling a full load of steel beams down the I-90 during a snowstorm. As he approached a steep decline, he tapped the brakes. Nothing happened. He pressed harder. The pedal went to the floor. The truck was a 20-ton missile hurtling toward a line of stopped cars. He had a split-second choice: plow through a minivan carrying a family or steer the rig off the embankment. He chose the embankment. The crash broke 3 of his ribs and shattered his leg, but he survived. He thought he would be hailed as a hero for saving that family. Instead, he woke up in the hospital, handcuffed to the bed. The police told him his blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. Leo looked me in the eye and swore on his mother's grave that he had not touched a drop of alcohol in 10 years. The company, my company, had planted the evidence. They falsified the toxicology report. They painted him as a reckless drunk to avoid a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for negligence. Bradley had not just fired him. He had framed him. He had sent an innocent man to prison for 2 years to save the company's insurance premiums. Leo leaned across the table, his eyes burning with tears he refused to shed. I sat in a cell for 730 days, Jerry, thinking about that brake pedal. I know what I felt. It was not ice. It was mechanical failure. And they buried it. Leo did not say another word. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a leather wallet that was held together by duct tape. His fingers were thick and calloused, but they moved with a surprising delicacy as he extracted a single folded piece of paper from the hidden compartment behind his ID. It was not just a piece of paper to him. It was a holy relic. It was the only thing standing between his sanity and the madness of being an innocent man in a cage. He slid it across the metal table toward me, guarding it with his eyes as if he expected it to turn to ash. I picked it up. The paper was soft from years of being folded and unfolded. It was stained with grease and smelled faintly of diesel and despair. The ink was faded but legible. I had to move closer to the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling to read it. My eyes strained in the dim light. It was a standard vehicle maintenance request form, date stamped November 14th, 2 years ago. Vehicle number 404. I read the mechanic's notes written in the box titled Issue Description. The words were clinical but terrifying. Brake pads at 10%. Rotors warped. Fluid leaking. Immediate replacement required. Do not drive. Those 3 words were underlined twice. Do not drive. My eyes moved down to the management response section. My breath caught in my throat. There was a red stamp that read, "Request denied." Next to it was the reason listed as budgetary restrictions. But a stamp is impersonal. A stamp can be blamed on a system or a clerical error. What froze the blood in my veins was what was scrawled at the bottom of the page. It was a signature. I knew that signature better than I knew my own face. I had taught the boy how to hold the pen. I had watched him practice his loops and curves on legal pads when he was 10 years old, sitting on the floor of my office. There it was, in black ink. Bradley Hawthorne. He had personally signed the death warrant for that truck. He had looked at a report saying the brakes were failing, and he had decided that saving a few $1,000s was worth risking a human life. He had weighed the cost of brake pads against the cost of a funeral, and he had chosen the funeral. My hands started to shake so violently that the paper rattled like dry leaves in a storm. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling. I had spent the last week mourning the loss of my money and my house. I had been angry that my son was a thief. I had been furious that he was ungrateful. But this was different. A thief steals your wallet. A monster signs a paper knowing it might kill a father of 3 on an icy highway. The image of Bradley smiling at the cocktail party flashed in my mind. He was not just a greedy child playing dress-up in my office. He was a killer, and I had raised him. The bile rose in my throat, bitter and hot. I looked up at Leo, and for the first time, I did not see a stranger. I saw the wreckage my own flesh and blood had caused. I stared at that signature until the black ink seemed to bleed into the fiber of the paper. It was not just a forgery of my authority. It was a complete corruption of my soul. For 2 years, I had been fighting my own body, recovering from heart attacks and strokes, telling myself the company was in good hands. I told myself Bradley needed space to grow. I was wrong. While I was busy trying not to die, my son was busy killing the spirit of everything I had built. I had treated him with kid gloves his entire life. I had given him the title without the struggle. And this was the result. A man who saw a human life as a disposable line item on a budget sheet. The guilt hit me harder than the freezing wind outside. I was not just a victim of Bradley's greed. I was his accomplice through my own negligence. I had created a monster by failing to teach him what it means to be a man. I looked up at Leo. The big man was watching me, waiting for me to crumble or cry. He expected the broken old man he found in the alley. But the tears did not come. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me. It was the same feeling I used to get before a hostile takeover in the 80s. This piece of paper in my hand was powerful, but it was just a copy. It was a photocopy of a photocopy. In a court of law, a high-priced lawyer like the one Bradley kept on retainer would tear it apart. They would call it a fabrication. They would claim a disgruntled ex-employee forged it to exact revenge. To bury Bradley and clear Leo, I needed more. I needed the undeniable truth. I needed the original digital footprint. I needed the server logs from the main house that showed the exact moment he denied the request and the timestamps of the cover-up. And there was only one place to get them. I folded the paper carefully and handed it back to Leo. He tucked it away into his wallet like a sacred text. "You cannot stay here, Jerry," he said, his voice low and rumbly. "I know a place in Wisconsin. My cousin has a farm. It is off the grid. You can disappear there. Be safe. Live out your days." I shook my head slowly. "I am done disappearing, Leo. and I am done being safe. I placed my hands on the cold metal table to steady myself. The pain in my legs was still there, but it was distant now, eclipsed by the mission. I know how to get your name cleared. I know how to get your commercial license back. And I know how to make sure the man who did this rots in a cell next to the one you occupied. Leo leaned in, his eyes narrowing. How? We need the hard drives from the master server, I said, keeping my voice steady. And to get them, I have to go back. Leo looked at me as if I had just spoken in tongues. He laughed, a harsh sound of disbelief that startled the woman sleeping on the next cot. Go back, to the house. You barely walked out of there alive. You are weak. You are being hunted. If you go back, they will finish the job. You are talking suicide, old man. Number 1. I stood up, ignoring the fire in my joints, and looked him dead in the eye. I am talking about a hostile takeover. Call the police, Leo. Tell them you found a confused old man wandering the streets. I need them to take me home. Leo dug into the pocket of his tattered army jacket and pulled out a handful of quarters. The metal coins felt heavy and cold as he dropped them into my palm. It was a moment of profound humiliation that burned hotter than the fever in my joints. I used to bill $5,000 for a 10-minute consultation, and now I was relying on the charity of a man who owned nothing but the clothes on his back to make a phone call. I walked over to the payphone mounted on the peeling yellow wall near the exit. It was covered in graffiti and grime, an artifact from a forgotten era, just like me. I lifted the receiver and dialed a number I had memorized 20 years ago. Sarah Jenkins, my corporate counsel, my oldest ally. She was the one person Bradley feared. If anyone could stop this madness, it was her. The phone rang 3 times. Sarah answered. Her voice was professional, crisp, and reassuringly familiar. I spoke quickly, knowing I did not have much time. Sarah, it is me. Do not hang up. Bradley has seized control. He is selling the company to Sterling. He forged my signature on the power of attorney. I need you to file an emergency injunction immediately. There was a pause, a long silence that made my stomach turn. I expected shock. I expected outrage. What I got was pity. Gerald, oh, thank God. We have been so worried. Bradley said you wandered off during the storm. He is frantic. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. I did not wander off, Sarah. I was held prisoner in the guest house. He is falsifying maintenance records. He is going to kill people just to cover his gambling debts. You have to listen to me. Sarah cut me off, but her tone was gentle. Too gentle. It was the voice one uses with a frightened child or a senile old man. Gerald, please. Bradley told us about the paranoia. He showed us the neurology report about the hallucinations. He said you might start inventing conspiracy theories. Just stay where you are. We want to help you. The cold reality washed over me. Bradley had been thorough. He had not just stolen my assets, he had stolen my credibility. To my oldest friend, I was not a whistleblower exposing a crime. I was a confused geriatric patient off his meds. I tried to argue to scream the truth into the mouthpiece. But then I heard it. The wail of sirens in the distance, getting louder. She had not been listening to me. She had been keeping me on the line to trace the location. I slammed the receiver down, but it was too late. Blue and red lights flashed against the dirty windows of the community center, turning the gray snow into a kaleidoscope of warning colors. Leo looked at me from the shadows. He knew the drill. If the police found him with me, they would send him back to prison for kidnapping. "Go," I whispered. He hesitated, looking at me with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Then he disappeared out the back door into the night. The front doors burst open. 2 police officers stepped in, letting in a gust of freezing air. They did not have their guns drawn. They had their hands out, palms up, the way you approach a frightened dog. "Mr. Hawthorne," one of them said softly, "it is okay. We are here to take you home. Your son is very worried about you." I looked at the handcuffs on the officer's belt. I knew I was not going home. I was going back to hell, and this time there would be no escape. The ride back to the estate was humiliating. I sat in the back of the patrol car, watching the familiar iron gates swing open, not as the owner, but as a fugitive being returned to custody. Bradley was waiting on the front steps. He was wearing his silk robe and holding a tumbler of scotch, but his hand was shaking with suppressed rage. He played the part of the relieved son perfectly, for the officers thanking them for finding his poor, confused father. But the moment the police cruiser disappeared down the driveway, the mask fell away. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with bruising force, and dragged me into the foyer. He threw me onto the marble floor. Vanessa was standing by the stairs, arms crossed, looking at me with pure disgust. "That is it," she hissed. "I am not doing this anymore, Bradley." "He is dangerous. He is wandering the streets telling lies to strangers. Send him to the secure ward at St. Jude. Do it tonight." Bradley looked down at me, his face twisted into a snarl. "You are right. I gave him a chance to live comfortably in the guest house, but he wants to play games." He pulled out his phone. "I am calling the director. They have a padded room waiting for him. He will never see the sun again." This was it. If I left this house tonight, I would never get back in to get the hard drive. I would die in an asylum, sedated and forgotten. I had to stay. I had to make him keep me here. I let my head loll to the side and started to mumble nonsense, drooling slightly to sell the performance. Bradley bent down to grab my collar to haul me up. His face inches from mine. I stopped trembling. I locked eyes with him. The fog in my gaze vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp, cold stare of the man who built this empire. I leaned forward and whispered so only he could hear. "Truck 404 Bradley. I know about the brake pads. I know about the forged signature. And I know about the blood on the snow." Bradley froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He dropped my collar as if it were burning hot and stumbled back a step. His phone clattered to the floor. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a primal terror. He stared at me, searching my face, trying to figure out if it was a moment of clarity or if I had known all along. Vanessa stepped forward, frowning. "What? What did he say to you?" "Call the asylum, Bradley. Get him out of here." Bradley held up a hand, silencing her. His eyes never left mine. "No, he stays." Vanessa looked at him like he was insane. "Are you kidding me? He just tried to run away." "I said he stays." Bradley roared, his voice cracking with panic. He picked up his phone and canceled the call. "If we send him away, he talks to doctors. He talks to nurses. He is too unstable. We keep him here." "In the main house. Lock him in the master bedroom. I need to keep an eye on him. I need to know what goes on in that rotting brain of his." He looked at me again, terrified and confused. He had thought I was a vegetable. Now he suspected I was a bomb. And he was right. I smiled a vacuous, empty smile and let him drag me up the stairs. I was back inside, and the hunt was on. The master bedroom was exactly as I had left it 3 weeks ago, but now it felt like a stage for the most difficult performance of my life. Bradley locked the door and paced back and forth like a caged tiger. He was sweating. The name of the truck, number 404, was eating him alive. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me, violent enough to rattle my teeth. "Tell me what you know, old man," he screamed. "Who told you about the brakes? Was it that driver? Is he blackmailing us?" I looked at him, but I did not let him see his father. I let him see a shell. I widened my eyes until they watered and started to tremble. I did not answer his question. Instead, I pointed a shaking finger at the empty corner of the room and screamed. "The Russians are coming for the steel! Close the gates! Close the gates!" Bradley stepped back confused. "Stop it! Stop acting! I know you are in there!" I stood up and lunged at the bedside table. I grabbed the heavy crystal lamp, a wedding gift from my late wife, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall with a deafening crash, sending shards of glass flying everywhere. I covered my head with my arms and curled into a ball on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "They are burning the tires," I wailed, my voice high and cracked. "The fire is everywhere. Help me, Mother! Help me!" Vanessa stood by the door, her hand over her mouth. She looked terrified, not of me, but of the madness she thought she was witnessing. Bradley looked unsure. He took a step toward me, his suspicion warring with the evidence before his eyes. I knew it was not enough. He was a suspicious man by nature. To convince him that I was truly gone, that I was no longer a threat to his empire, I had to destroy the last shred of my dignity. I had to do the one thing that no proud man would ever do voluntarily. I stopped screaming. I sat up on the rug amidst the broken glass and stared blankly ahead. I relaxed the muscles in my bladder. I forced myself to let go. The dark stain spread across the front of my gray trousers, visible and undeniable. The warm wetness was uncomfortable, but the shame was agonizing. It burned hotter than any fire. I sat there in my own filth, rocking back and forth, humming a nursery rhyme I had not heard in 60 years. Vanessa gasped and recoiled, pressing her back against the door as if I had turned into a leper. "Oh my God, Bradley, look at him!" She covered her nose, her face twisted in pure revulsion. "He is not plotting anything. He is broken. He is just a senile, incontinent old man. It smells disgusting in here." Bradley looked down at me at the stain spreading on the expensive Persian rug. The fear in his eyes vanished, replaced by a deep, sneering contempt. He saw a man who had lost control of his own body, let alone his mind. He let out a long breath and holstered his suspicion. "You are right," he muttered, turning away from the sight of me. "He is gone. No one would believe a word from a man who pisses himself on the floor. Leave him here. Let him rot in his own mess." They walked out. I heard the lock click. I sat alone in the dim light, the smell of urine heavy in the air. I had lost my dignity, but I had bought my freedom. They would not watch me closely now. They thought I was finished. I stopped rocking. I stopped humming. I wiped my face and looked at the clock. The performance was over. Now the work began. My humiliation was complete, but it was also my camouflage. To Bradley and his spineless chief accountant Fletcher, I was no longer a person. I was a piece of furniture, a stained rug in the corner of the room that smelled of urine and decay. They set up a folding table right at the foot of my bed. They did not even lower their voices. Why would they whisper in front of a vegetable? I lay there with my eyes closed, regulating my breathing to a slow, rhythmic snore, while every nerve in my body was screaming with alertness. Fletcher was a man who sweated when the temperature was 70 degrees, and today he looked like he was melting. I heard the frantic tapping of keys on a laptop, followed by a heavy sigh that sounded like a tire losing air. "We have a problem," Bradley Fletcher said, his voice trembling. "Sterling's team just sent over the due diligence checklist for tomorrow morning. They are not just sending lawyers, they are sending forensic accountants and IT specialists. They want to mirror the servers to check for data integrity." I heard the clink of glass against glass. Bradley was drinking again. "Let them come," he said dismissively. "The current books are clean. We cook them perfectly." "It is not the current books I am worried about," Fletcher hissed. "It is the legacy data. The maintenance logs from the last 10 years. If they run a recovery algorithm, they will see the pattern. They will see the denials. They will see the override codes you used to clear Truck 404 and 100 others just like it. If Sterling sees that, he walks away. And then the district attorney walks in." There was a long silence. I kept my eyes shut, listening to the sound of Bradley pacing the room. The floorboards creaked under his expensive Italian loafers. "They are not going to run a recovery algorithm," Bradley said finally, his voice dropping to a cold, dangerous register. "Because there will be no hard drives to recover from." "What do you mean?" Fletcher asked. "I had the IT guys pull the physical drives from the basement server rack an hour ago," Bradley said. "I told them we were upgrading the hardware for the new owners. They bought it." My heart skipped a beat. The evidence. The digital footprint of every crime he had committed against my drivers, against Leo, and against me was on those drives. If he destroyed them, the truth would disappear forever. "Where are they?" Fletcher asked. "Safe," Bradley replied. "I locked them in the wall safe in my study. The master backups are there too. Everything is on those 2 black drives. Tonight, after the staff goes home, and before the sale closes tomorrow, we take them to the incinerator at the rail yard. We melt them down to slag. By the time Sterling signs the check, the history of Hawthorne Logistics will be nothing but ash." Fletcher let out a breath of relief. "Okay, that works. As long as they are in the safe, they are secure. No one has the combination but you." Bradley laughed. "Exactly. And the only other person who knew it is currently drooling on his pillow 5 feet away." I let out a loud snort and shifted in the bed, mumbling nonsense just to sell the lie one last time. Bradley chuckled. "Look at him, the great Gerald Hawthorne. He does not even know what day it is." They packed up their papers and left the room confident that they had committed the perfect crime. The door clicked shut. I opened my eyes. I stared at the ceiling in the darkness. Bradley was right about one thing. The only other person who knew the combination was me. It was his mother's birthday. He was going to burn the truth at dawn. That meant I had to crawl into the belly of the beast and steal it back tonight. The race was on. The ammonia smell of my own urine was burning my eyes, but it was the sound of Matilda's weeping that filled the room with an even heavier despair. She entered carrying a basin of warm water and fresh linens. The terrifying warden who had force-fed me pills for weeks was gone. In her place was a broken woman. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs as she set the basin down. She had just gotten off the phone with her lawyer, and I knew from the conversation I had overheard earlier that things were not going well. Her ex-husband was winning. He was going to take her son Toby and she was powerless to stop it. She began to undress me to clean away the filth I had created to fool my son. It was the lowest moment of my life. A 72-year-old billionaire being cleaned like an infant by a woman who hated him. But as she leaned over to wipe my leg, her tears fell onto my skin. They were hot and real. She muttered to herself a mantra of hopelessness. I cannot lose him. I cannot lose him. I waited until her face was inches from mine. Then I moved. I did not move like an invalid. I reached out and clamped my hand around her wrist with an iron grip. Matilda gasped and tried to pull away, dropping the washcloth. She opened her mouth to scream for Bradley, but I sat up straight. The vacant look in my eyes vanished, instantly replaced by the sharp, commanding gaze that had stared down union leaders and hostile board members for 40 years. Quiet, I commanded. My voice was low, but it cracked like a whip in the silent room. Do not scream. Listen to me. Matilda froze. She stared at me as if a corpse had just sat up in a coffin. You can talk. You are not crazy. Your lawyer is an incompetent fool, Matilda, I said, cutting straight to the point. He is fighting a financial battle. You cannot win a financial battle against a man like your husband. You need to fight a psychological one. She blinked, tears still streaming down her face, confused and terrified. What are you talking about? I leaned in closer, my grip on her wrist tightening. Illinois Family Law, Article 6, Section 4, Clause 12. It states that a history of psychological manipulation and verified verbal abuse is grounds for immediate temporary custody suspension. You do not need to prove he hit you. You need to prove he terrorized you. Matilda stopped crying. She was listening now. But I have no proof, she whispered. I do not need proof, I said. I need a narrative. I can draft an affidavit for you tonight that will make a family court judge weep. I will tell you exactly which key words to use. I will tell you how to structure your testimony to trigger an immediate restraining order. You will walk out of that court with sole custody of Toby and full child support. I guarantee it. She looked at me, searching for the catch. Why? Why would you help me? Because I need a soldier, Matilda. I pointed to the door. My son is destroying my life, just like your husband is destroying yours. I am going to break into his safe tonight. I need you to be my lookout. I save your son. You help me save my company. Do we have a deal? She looked at the door, then back at me. She looked at the filthy sheets and then at the fire in my eyes. She wiped her face with her sleeve. The fear was gone. She nodded once. Tell me what to write. The digital clock on the bedside table flickered to 2 a.m. It was time. Matilda checked the hallway one last time and gave me a curt nod. She had done her part, disabling the alarm on my door, but she could not touch the main security system without triggering a silent alert to Bradley's phone. That meant I had to navigate the corridor the hard way. Bradley had installed motion sensors that swept the hallway at chest height, designed to catch a walking intruder. He never anticipated that the intruder would be his crippled father, crawling on his belly like a snake. I lowered myself from the bed to the floor. The impact sent a jolt of agony through my hip that nearly made me black out. I bit down on my sleeve to stifle a groan. The hallway stretched out before me. 10 meters. In my prime, I could have crossed it in 3 strides. Tonight, it looked like the length of a football field. I began to crawl. Left hand, right knee, drag the bad leg, repeat. The Persian runner rug was rough against my palms, and the smell of dust was thick in my nose. Above me, the red eye of the security camera blinked rhythmically. I pressed my face into the carpet, feeling the hum of the house beneath me. I was the founder of this company. I had dined with presidents and negotiated billion-dollar mergers. Now I was slithering across the floor of my own home, terrified of a blinking light. The indignity fueled me. Every inch I crawled was an act of rebellion. Halfway there, a floorboard groaned under my weight. In the silence of the night, it sounded like a gunshot. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I waited for the sound of a door opening. I waited for Bradley to rush out with a gun. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. The house settled back into silence. It was just the old wood breathing, shifting in the cold winter air. I exhaled a breath I did not know I was holding, and forced myself to move again. My shoulders burned. My bad leg felt like it was on fire. Sweat dripped from my forehead, stinging my eyes, but I could not stop to wipe it. Finally, my hand touched the cold wood of the study door. I reached up and turned the handle slowly, praying it was well oiled. It turned silently. I pushed the door open and crawled inside. The study smelled of stale cigar smoke and the expensive scotch Bradley drank to forget what he was. I pulled myself up using the edge of the mahogany desk. My legs shook violently, but I locked my knees and stood. The wall safe was hidden behind a portrait of a fox hunt, a pretentious piece of art Bradley had bought to look like old money. I swung the frame aside. The keypad glowed soft blue in the darkness. I did not need to guess the code. For all his hatred of me, Bradley had worshipped his mother. He blamed me for her death from cancer, claiming I worked too much to care for her. It was his justification for everything. I punched in the numbers. 082455. Her birthday. The light turned green. The lock clicked. The safe door swung open with a whisper of well-oiled hinges, revealing the dark metal heart of my son's corruption. Inside sat 2 matte black external hard drives stacked neatly on top of a pile of cash. Those drives were not just storage devices. They were the smoking gun. They contained the server logs, the denied maintenance requests, and the time-stamped evidence of every illegal override Bradley had authorized in the last 2 years. They were the difference between Leo going back to prison and my son taking his place. My hands trembled as I reached for them, not from age, but from the sheer weight of the moment. I grabbed the cold metal casings and shoved them deep into the waistband of my pajama pants, tightening the drawstring until it cut into my skin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the 2 decoy drives Matilda had scavenged from the recycling bin in the basement. They were old and fried, but in the dark they looked identical to the ones I had just stolen. I placed them into the safe, positioning them exactly as the originals had been. I closed the heavy steel door and spun the dial, locking away the deception. It was done. I had the truth strapped to my body. All I had to do was crawl back to my room without being seen. I turned to leave, but then the world stopped. A beam of yellow light sliced through the darkness under the study door. The hallway lights had been turned on. My blood froze in my veins. I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the hardwood floor. They were not the heavy, confident strides of Bradley. They were lighter, quicker. Vanessa. She was not walking toward the kitchen. She was walking toward the study. I looked at the door, then at the distance to the window. There was no time. I was a cripple on his knees in the middle of a crime scene. If she opened that door and saw me, the game was over. She would scream, Bradley would come running with his gun, and I would never leave this house alive. Panic flared hot and bright, but I forced it down. I scrambled backward, dragging my dead leg like a sack of sand. I aimed for the only cover available. The massive mahogany desk where I had signed the papers to build this house 30 years ago. I squeezed myself into the tight knee hole of the desk, pressing my back against the wood. The dust bunnies from years of neglect tickled my nose, and I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a sneeze. I pulled my legs in tight, praying that the shadows would hold me. The door handle turned with a sharp, metallic latching sound. The door creaked open. Vanessa stepped into the room. From my vantage point on the floor, I could only see her bare feet and the hem of her white silk robe. She did not turn on the overhead light. She stood in the doorway for a long, terrifying moment. I could hear her breathing. It was shallow and agitated. She walked further into the room, her footsteps stopping right in front of the desk. I stopped breathing. My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs, I was sure she could hear it echoing in the quiet room. She was inches away. If she took one step back or dropped something and looked down, she would see her father-in-law curled up like a frightened rat, clutching the evidence that would destroy her life. The knee hole of the desk was a coffin. I was squeezed into it so tightly that my ribs scraped against the wood with every shallow breath. Vanessa was standing right there. Her bare feet were pale ghosts on the dark Persian rug, less than 6 inches from my nose. The smell of her expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5, clashed violently with the smell of old dust and my own fear. She stood frozen. I could hear the fabric of her silk robe rustle as she shifted her weight. Then she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. Bradley. She took a step closer to the wall. Why is the picture frame crooked? My heart stopped beating. I had closed the safe. I had spun the dial. But in my haste to hide, I must have failed to align the heavy frame of the fox hunt painting perfectly. It was tilted just a fraction of an inch to the left. To anyone else, it would be invisible. But Vanessa was a woman who spent her life obsessing over appearances. A crooked frame was an offense to her world order. She reached out. I saw her hand move into my peripheral vision. She was going to straighten the picture. And when she did, she would look down. She would see the dust disturbed on the floor. She would see the shadow under the desk. She would see me. I tensed my muscles. I was a 72-year-old cripple hiding in the dark, but I prepared to fight. If she saw me, I would have to grab her ankle and pull her down. I would have to silence her. The thought was horrifying, but survival is a brutal instinct. Her fingers touched the frame. I closed my eyes and prepared for the end. Then came the savior I never expected. This house was just like my son. A beautiful facade hiding a rotten core. We had gold-plated faucets, but the foundation was cracking. We had marble floors, but the walls were infested. A gray rat the size of a kitten, fattened on the neglect of the estate, scurried out from behind the heavy velvet drapes. It did not care about corporate espionage. It just wanted the crumb of cracker Vanessa had dropped earlier. It ran across the floor, a blur of fur and claws, and scurried directly over Vanessa's bare foot. The scream that tore from her throat was primal. It was the shriek of a woman who feared rodents more than she feared God. She did not look at the desk. She did not look at the safe. She snatched her hand back as if the wall had bitten her. "Get it off me! Get it off!" She spun around, flailing her arms, and sprinted out of the room, slamming the door behind her so hard the walls shook. I heard her running down the hallway, screaming for Bradley, claiming the house was overrun with vermin. I did not waste a second. I scrambled out from under the desk. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain in my joints was returning with a vengeance, but I did not care. I crawled. I dragged my body across the floor, my fingernails digging into the wood. I reached the door and cracked it open. The hallway was empty. I could hear them downstairs in the kitchen arguing. I made it back to my room. I pulled the hard drives from my waistband and shoved them deep inside the hollow underside of my mattress. I collapsed onto the bed, pulling the urine-stained sheets up to my chin, just as I heard heavy footsteps approaching. The door flew open. Bradley stood there, gun in hand, looking wild. He scanned the room. He saw his father asleep in a pile of filth, mouth open, snoring softly. He wrinkled his nose in disgust and lowered the weapon. "Just a rat," he muttered to himself, holstering the gun. He turned and left, locking the door again. He was right. There was a rat in the house. But it was not the one with 4 legs, and it had just stolen his future. The neon sign of the diner on 4th Street flickered with a nervous buzzing sound that matched the tension in the air. It was a place where people went to be forgotten, a landscape of cracked vinyl seats and the smell of stale coffee. Leo Vasquez sat in the booth furthest from the door, his back against the wall. He was not eating. He was watching. When the door opened and a woman in a heavy trench coat walked in, Leo's hand drifted instinctively to the steak knife on the table. It was Matilda. She looked terrified. Her eyes darted around the empty room before locking onto him. She walked over, her movements stiff and unnatural. She did not look like a conspirator. She looked like a woman who was about to be executed. She sat down opposite him without removing her coat. She did not say hello. She simply reached into her large bag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in a thick towel. She slid it across the sticky formica table. The object was heavy. It made a solid thud that echoed in the quiet room. Leo did not touch it. He stared at her, his face a mask of suspicion. He had spent 2 years in prison because he trusted the wrong people at Hawthorne Logistics. He was not about to make that mistake again. "Is this it?" Leo asked, his voice a low rumble. "Is this the part where the police kicked down the door? Did Bradley promise you a bonus for turning in the fugitive?" Matilda shook her head violently, tears springing to her eyes. "No, I am risking my life being here. He sent me, Gerald. He said this is the only way to save us both." Leo laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "The old man is brain dead, lady. Everyone knows that. This is a trap." He started to slide out of the booth, ready to run. "Wait." Matilda reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. It was torn from the back of a medical chart. She slammed it down on the table on top of the bundle. "Read it, please. Just read it." Leo hesitated. He looked at the door, then at the paper. He picked it up. The handwriting was jagged and spiked, written by a hand that was fighting against paralysis. But the message was clear. It read simply, "To the driver of truck 404, I cannot give you back the years you lost, but I can give you back your name. Return the favor by giving me back my company." Leo stared at the words, Truck 404. No one spoke that number anymore. It was a ghost story. The anger that had fueled him for days suddenly shifted into something else. Hope. A dangerous, fragile hope. He reached out and unwrapped the towel. 2 black hard drives sat there, cold and unassuming. They looked like nothing, but Leo knew he was looking at the soul of the devil. He looked up at Matilda. Her fear was real. He nodded slowly. "Okay, I believe you." Matilda let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Take them to Sarah Jenkins, the lawyer. Gerald said she is the only one who can read them without alerting Bradley." "I know where her office is," Leo said, tucking the drives into the deep pockets of his army jacket. He stood up, towering over the table. "You go back. Act normal. Tell the old man. Tell him the delivery is en route." Matilda hurried out into the rain, disappearing into the night to return to her cage. Leo stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the hard drives against his hip. It was the weight of truth. He threw a crumpled bill on the table and walked out. He had a delivery to make, and for the first time in 2 years, he was not driving blind. The office of Sarah Jenkins was a fortress of mahogany and leather, usually reserved for corporate mergers, but tonight it was the war room for a revolution. Leo stood by the window, watching the street for any sign of Bradley's private security, while Sarah connected the stolen hard drive to her encrypted laptop. Her hand hovered over the mouse for a second. She knew that once she clicked that file, there was no going back. She opened the drive. The screen did not just show a few files. It showed a graveyard. Folder after folder of denied maintenance requests, invoices for parts that never existed, receipts for brake pads purchased from uncertified suppliers in overseas markets for pennies on the dollar. It was not just Truck 404. It was the entire fleet. Truck 119, Truck 206, Truck 550. All of them ticking time bombs. Sarah's face went pale as she ran the total sum of the diverted funds through her calculator. The number on the screen was staggering. $50 million. My son had not just skimmed off the top. He had hollowed out the company and filled the void with cheap parts and human lives. Leo leaned in his massive frame, casting a shadow over the desk. He pointed to a file named Incident Reports. There were hundreds of them. Accidents classified as driver error that were actually mechanical failures. Leo's hands clenched into fists. He was not the only victim. He was just the only one who survived to tell the tale. Sarah pushed her chair back. Her lawyer instincts took over. "This is not corporate malfeasance, Leo. This is manslaughter on an industrial scale." She reached for the landline on her desk. "I am calling the district attorney. We have enough here to get a warrant for Bradley's arrest within the hour." Before she could lift the receiver, the burner phone in Leo's pocket buzzed. He pulled it out and put it on speaker. My voice crackled through the tiny speaker, raspy and weak, but commanding. "Do not make that call, Sarah." Sarah froze. "Gerald, you are safe. We have the evidence. We have to end this now. The police need to know." "No," I rasped. "If you call the police now, Bradley will post bail by morning. He will hire a team of defense attorneys to bury this evidence in motions and hearings for 5 years. He will spin it. He will blame a subordinate. He might even walk away." "Then what do we do?" Sarah demanded. "We cannot sit on this." "We do not sit on it," I said. "We broadcast it. Tomorrow at noon, he is signing the sale agreement with Sterling. The entire industry will be there. The press will be there. I do not want him arrested in the quiet of his home. I want him stripped naked in front of the world. Bring the drive to the party, Sarah. We are going to put on a show. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet drapes, but it brought no warmth to the room, only the cold light of the day of judgment. The transformation began at 6 in the morning. Bradley did not send Matilda this time. He sent a team of high-end groomers who treated me not like a human being, but like a corpse being prepared for an open casket funeral. They shaved the stubble from my chin with hot towels and straight razors. They combed my thinning hair, covering the bald spots with careful precision. They scrubbed the smell of urine and despair from my skin and replaced it with the scent of expensive sandalwood cologne. Then came the costume. They pulled my charcoal gray three-piece suit from the back of the closet. It was a suit I had worn to ring the opening bell on the stock exchange 10 years ago. Back then it had been armor. Now, as they threaded my limp arms through the sleeves, it felt like a costume for a tragic play. The fabric which used to fit across my broad shoulders hung loosely on my withered frame. I had lost 20 pounds in captivity. I looked like a scarecrow dressed in silk, but that did not matter to Bradley. He did not need me to look strong. He only needed me to look presentable. I was no longer the CEO. I was a prop, a silent symbol of legacy to legitimize his theft. Bradley entered the room as the groomers were fastening my cufflinks. He looked impeccable in a navy blue suit, but I could smell the anxiety rolling off him. He was chewing a nicotine gum furiously, and his eyes were bloodshot. He dismissed the staff with a wave of his hand and waited until the door clicked shut. The silence that followed was thick with the history of everything he had done to me. He walked over and knelt down in front of the wheelchair, placing his hands on the armrests. He invaded my personal space, forcing me to look at him. "Listen to me closely, Dad," he said, his voice tight and controlled. "Today is the most important day of my life. Mr. Sterling is going to be here in 2 hours, along with half the business world. We are going to go downstairs. You are going to sit next to me on the stage." He paused, squeezing the armrests until the leather creaked. "You do not speak. You do not try to stand. You do not drool. You just sit there. You smile at the cameras and you nod when Sterling speaks. That is your entire job. If you do this, if you play the part of the happy retiring chairman, I will make sure you get the VIP suite at the nursing home. Ocean view, private nurses, soft food. You can live out your days in luxury." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of mint and stale scotch. "But if you make a scene, if you try to say one word about brake pads or hard drives, I will put you in the state asylum. I will throw you in a padded cell and throw away the key. Do you understand me?" I looked at him. I looked at the son I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, who was now threatening to bury me alive. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I blinked slowly behind my thick reading glasses. I gave a weak, tremulous nod. "Good," Bradley said, patting my cheek with a patronizing tap. "Good boy." He stood up and spun the wheelchair around, pushing me toward the door. He thought he had won. He thought he was pushing a harmless invalid to a ceremony. He did not realize he was wheeling a Trojan horse right into the center of his castle. I adjusted my glasses with a shaking hand, hiding the glint of cold, hard steel in my eyes. The stage was set. The razor scraped against my skin, taking 2 years of prison grime and bad memories with it. When I rinsed the blade, the water in the sink turned gray. I looked up at the mirror, and for the first time since the accident, I saw the face of Leo Vasquez. Not the inmate, not the drunk, but the man who used to drive the most difficult routes in the country. I did not look like a corporate tycoon. I looked like a bouncer who had been forced into a tuxedo. The white waiter's jacket Sarah had procured for me was tight across the shoulders, and the bow tie felt like a noose, but it was the perfect camouflage. In a room full of billionaires, nobody looks at the help. I pinned the plastic ID badge to my lapel. It was my old employee card, the one they had confiscated the night of the crash. Sarah had used her administrative access to reactivate it in the system, flagging me as a temporary event contractor. It was a digital ghost key. If it worked, I was in. If it failed, I was going back to a cell. I took a deep breath, checking the pocket of my trousers where the hard drive sat heavy and cold. It was time to serve dinner. I entered the hotel through the loading dock. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of shouting chefs, clanging pans, and steam. I grabbed a tray of champagne flutes and marched toward the double doors that led to the ballroom. I kept my head down, moving with the frantic pace of the other servers. I was almost through the service corridor when a heavy hand slammed onto my chest, stopping me dead in my tracks. "Hold up, big man." I froze. I looked up to see the head of security. He was a former linebacker with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and eyes that missed nothing. He was not looking at the champagne. He was looking at my face. He scanned me from head to toe, his gaze lingering on the scar above my eyebrow. "I do not have you on the roster," he said, his voice flat and suspicious. "I know every regular on the banquet staff. Who are you?" My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face impassive. I channeled the boredom of a man working a minimum wage job on a Saturday. "Agency sent me," I grunted, shifting the heavy tray to my other hand. "One of your guys called in sick. Something about food poisoning. They told me to report to the floor manager." The guard narrowed his eyes. He did not buy it. He reached for the scanner on his belt. "Let me see your badge." I leaned forward, offering the plastic rectangle. This was the moment. If Sarah's code was even one digit off, the scanner would flash red and 3 armed guards would tackle me before I could drop the tray. He held the device up. It hummed. The lasers swept across the barcode. Time seemed to stretch. The sounds of the kitchen faded into a dull roar. Bleep. A solid green light flashed on the screen. The guard looked at the readout, then back at me. The suspicion evaporated, replaced by indifference. "All right, you are clear. Get out there. They are screaming for more drinks at table 4. I nodded and pushed through the doors. The ballroom opened up before me, a cavern of crystal chandeliers and expensive flowers. I did not head for table 4. I wove through the crowd, moving toward the back of the room, where a discreet black door was marked with a simple sign, Audio-Visual Control. I waited for the guard to turn his back, then I slipped inside. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of monitors. The stage was set. Now I just had to wait for the cue. The ballroom was a suffocating cage of crystal and fake smiles. 500 of the most powerful people in Chicago were packed into the room, drinking champagne that cost more than a driver's annual salary. I sat in the center of it all, trapped in my wheelchair like a museum exhibit on display. They walked past me and averted their eyes. To them, I was already dead. I was a relic of a bygone era, a reminder of mortality that spoiled their party mood. Then came the vultures. Marcus Sterling approached our table, his tuxedo fitting his lean frame like a second skin. He held a flute of sparkling wine and looked down at me with a smirk that was sharp enough to cut glass. He did not offer to shake my hand. He did not even address me directly. He turned to my son and gestured at me with his glass, as if I were a piece of furniture he was considering buying at an estate sale. "Is this him?" Sterling asked, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "The great Gerald Hawthorne. I remember when he used to terrify the boardrooms of this city. He used to roar like a lion. Now look at him. He is just a frightened old house cat waiting for a saucer of milk." My blood boiled. I wanted to stand up and smash his teeth in. I wanted to tell him that I had forgotten more about business than he would ever know. But I remembered the plan. I remembered Leo in the control room and the hard drive in the system. So I did nothing. I let my head droop. I let my mouth hang open. I played the part of the broken invalid perfectly. Bradley laughed. It was a nervous, eager sound. He wanted to please his new master so desperately that he was willing to dance on my grave. "You are right, Marcus," my son said, clapping Sterling on the shoulder. "The old guard had their time, but the world moves on. Dinosaurs go extinct. That is just nature. We are the future now." He patted my shoulder with a condescending tap that felt like a slap in the face. "Just sit tight, Dad," he whispered. "Try not to embarrass us." Bradley adjusted his tie and walked toward the stage. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. He stepped up to the podium, basking in the spotlight. He looked handsome. He looked successful. He looked like the king of the world. He tapped the microphone and smiled that oily, practiced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you for coming. Today marks a new chapter for Hawthorne Logistics, a chapter defined by efficiency, profit, and growth." He picked up the remote control for the projector. Behind him, a massive white screen descended from the ceiling. "I have prepared a presentation," he continued, holding his finger over the button. "It shows our record-breaking performance over the last 2 quarters. It proves that we are the most reliable fleet in the industry." I watched him from my wheelchair. I watched the confidence in his eyes. He really believed he had won. He thought he was about to show a bar graph of rising profits. He had no idea that he was holding the trigger to his own destruction. I gripped the armrests of my chair, my knuckles turning white. "Do it, Bradley," I thought. "Press the button. Show them who you really are." He paused for dramatic effect, looked out at the audience, and pressed his thumb down on the clicker. The click of the remote was the trigger that blew the world apart. Bradley stood there with his hand frozen in midair, waiting for the applause that never came. The massive screen behind him did not display a graph of rising profits or a projection of future growth. It flickered once with a burst of static, and then settled into a grainy, high-contrast image that made the blood run cold in the veins of everyone in the room. It was a dashcam video. The timestamp in the corner read November 14th, 2 years ago. The camera was shaking violently, showing a snow-covered highway rushing past at terrifying speed. You could hear the wind howling against the windshield. You could hear the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the driver fighting the wheel. Then came the voice. It was not the driver. It was a recording overlaying the video, a phone call that had been synced perfectly to the footage. "I do not care what the mechanic says." The voice boomed through the ballroom speakers, clear and arrogant. It was Bradley. Every head in the room turned toward the stage. The audio continued mercilessly. "Put the load on truck 404. If the brakes squeal, turn up the radio. We are not missing this deadline for a $50 part. On the screen, the truck swerved. The brake lights of a minivan appeared ahead. The driver screamed. The rig jackknifed, and the screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier than a tombstone. Then the room erupted. 500 people gasped as one. Glasses dropped shattering on the floor. Sterling stood up, his face a mask of shock and fury. Bradley looked at the screen, then at the audience, his eyes wide with a terror that was absolute. He slammed his hand down on the laptop podium. "Stop it!" he screamed. "It is a fake! Turn it off!" He hammered the keys frantically, trying to close the window, trying to mute the sound, trying to do anything to stop the truth from bleeding out. But the laptop did not obey. A large red padlock icon appeared on the monitor with a single message flashing in bold letters. System locked. Access denied. Somewhere in the back of the room, Leo was holding the master key, and he was not letting go. Vanessa was the first to react. She did not look at the screen. She looked at the destruction of her lifestyle. She saw the yachts and the parties vaporizing. She hiked up her expensive designer gown and sprinted across the stage toward the main power bank in the corner. She was going to kill the feed, even if she had to rip the wires out of the wall with her bare hands. She was 5 feet away from the outlet when a figure stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. It was Matilda. She was not wearing her nurse's uniform. She was wearing a simple, elegant dress that Sarah had bought her, and she looked like a warrior. She did not shout. She simply stepped forward and planted her foot firmly in Vanessa's path. Vanessa was moving too fast to stop. Her heel caught on Matilda's leg. She pitched forward, flailing her arms, and crashed spectacularly onto the hardwood stage, sliding across the floor in a tangle of silk and limbs. She landed at the feet of the first row, looking up, dazed and humiliated. Matilda stood over her, not with malice, but with a cool justice. She smoothed her dress, looked at the fallen queen, and then looked across the room at me. The stage was ours. The spotlight cut through the semi-darkness of the ballroom and pinned me to the floor. It was blinding white and hot, but I did not blink. The video on the screen behind my son had done its work. The room was drowning in a sea of shocked murmurs and gasps, but I was the island of calm in the center of the storm. I placed my hands on the leather armrests of the wheelchair. For weeks, these hands had been trembling tools of deception, shaking to spill water or dropping pills to fool my captors. Now they were steady. They were the hands that had steered 18-wheelers through ice storms and steered $1 billion company through recessions. I gripped the leather. I engaged my core, and I pushed. It was not a struggle. It was a resurrection. I rose from the seat slowly and deliberately uncoiling my frame inch by inch. My knees did not buckle. My spine did not curve. I stood up to my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I buttoned my jacket with a singular, crisp motion. The charcoal suit, which had looked like a shroud moments ago, now draped perfectly over my shoulders. I was no longer the Scarecrow. I was the Iron Man. A collective sound swept through the ballroom. It was the sound of air being sucked out of 500 lungs at once. A glass dropped somewhere in the back, shattering on the marble, but no one looked. They were paralyzed by the impossibility of what they were seeing. The vegetable was walking. The invalid was a warrior. I took my first step. My dress shoe struck the floor with a heavy, authoritative thud that echoed in the silence. Then another step. Then another. I did not shuffle. I did not limp. I marched. I walked down the center aisle toward the stage. My eyes locked on the man standing behind the podium. Bradley looked like he was seeing a ghost. His skin had turned the color of old paper. He gripped the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles were white, his body trembling as if he were the one suffering from a neurological collapse. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. He tried again, his voice a pathetic squeak that was picked up by the microphone. "Dad, you were standing. But the doctor said—" I did not answer. I did not stop. I climbed the stairs to the stage. 1, 2, 3. I walked past Vanessa, who was still sprawled on the floor, looking up at me in horror. I walked past the frozen form of Marcus Sterling, whose smirk had been replaced by the hollow look of a man who realizes he bet on the wrong horse. I reached the podium. Bradley shrank back, cowering, as if he expected me to hit him. I did not hit him. Violence is for the desperate, and I was in total control. I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the microphone in his shaking hand. I pulled it away. He let it go without a fight. He was already defeated. I looked out at the sea of faces, the investors, the partners, the sharks. I adjusted the lapel of my jacket. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of freedom. The lion had returned to his pride. The feedback from the microphone shrieked for a split second before settling into a hum that vibrated against my palm. I looked out at the 500 faces staring back at me. I saw confusion. I saw fear. I saw the realization dawning in the eyes of the board members that they had been complicit in a tragedy. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The acoustics of the room were designed to carry a whisper, and I spoke with the weight of an avalanche. "You look at me and you see a ghost," I said, my voice steady and clear, reverberating off the crystal chandeliers. "You thought I was finished. You thought age had eaten away my mind and left me a drooling shell. You looked at my trembling hands and my wheelchair, and you saw an opportunity to carve up my legacy. But you were wrong." I turned slowly to look at Bradley. He was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face, a portrait of a child caught with his hand in the jar. I did not feel pity. I felt a cold, clinical detachment. I did not go silent because I had nothing to say. I continued turning back to the crowd. I went silent because that is the only way to hear the termites chewing through the hull of the ship. I had to become invisible so I could see who remained loyal and who was holding the match to burn it all down. For 2 years, I watched my son trade safety for profit. I watched him sell the soul of this company for a seat at the high table. A murmur ran through the crowd, but I cut through it with a sharp gesture. I raised my hand and pointed a steady finger toward the back of the room. The spotlight followed my direction, landing on the audio-visual booth. Leaning against the doorframe, wearing an ill-fitting waiter's jacket, was Leo Vasquez. He looked out of place among the tuxedos and the diamonds, but to me, he was the only thing in the room that was real. "You think legacy is about bloodlines?" I thundered, my voice rising. "You think because this man carries my last name, he inherits my spirit? You are mistaken. Bradley Hawthorne is a biological accident. He is a man who would kill a stranger to save a quarterly bonus. That man in the back, that truck driver who spent 2 years in a cage for a crime he did not commit, he is the one who understands what this company was built on. He sacrificed his freedom to save a family on an icy highway. He is the moral center that we lost. He is the true heir to everything I built, not this hollow suit standing next to me." Bradley sobbed, a broken sound that was lost in the tension of the room. He reached out to grab my sleeve, begging with his eyes, but I stepped away from him, severing the connection forever. The heavy double doors at the main entrance swung open with a sound like thunder. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Sarah Jenkins walked in. She was not smiling. She walked with the grim purpose of an executioner. Flanking her were 4 officers in dark uniforms with the insignia of the Economic Crimes Unit on their chests. They marched down the aisle, the sound of their boots drowning out the soft music that was still playing in the background. The party was over. Justice had arrived. Bradley did not go down without a fight. He lunged toward the podium, his face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. He looked like a drowning man trying to climb onto the back of the person he had tried to drown. He grabbed the microphone stand so hard it rattled and screamed at the top of his lungs, "You cannot do this. You cannot arrest me. I own this company." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document, waving it in the air like a weapon. "I have the power of attorney," he shrieked, saliva flying from his lips. "It is signed. It is notarized. He signed over full control to me 3 weeks ago. Legally, I am the CEO. I can sell whatever I want. I can fire whoever I want. This is a coup." The police officers hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking at the legal document. A signed contract is a powerful thing, even in the face of criminal accusations. The room went quiet again, waiting to see if the villain had found a loophole. I looked at my son, and for the first time in my life, I let out a genuine laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was dry and sharp, like dead leaves crunching underfoot. I stepped closer to him until I was leaning into the microphone. "You were always so focused on the destination, Bradley, that you never looked at the road," I said, my voice calm and deadly. "You were so eager to take the crown, you forgot to look at the king." Hands. I held up my right hand, the hand that had signed billion-dollar mergers, the hand that had built this building. I am right-handed, Bradley. I have been right-handed for 72 years. Everyone in this room who has ever done business with me knows that. I pointed to the document, shaking in his grip. Look at the signature on that paper. Look at the slant of the ink. Look at the jagged loops. When you forced me to sign that while I was drugged in bed, I used my left hand. Bradley stared at the paper, his eyes widening. "So what?" he stammered. "It is still your name. It is still your signature. It counts." "Wrong," I said. I turned to the crowd, addressing the lawyers and the partners. In 1982, when I incorporated Hawthorne Logistics, I wrote a fail-safe into the original bylaws. It is known as the Dead Man Clause. It states clearly that any transfer of executive power executed with the non-dominant hand during a documented medical crisis is not a binding contract. It is a distress signal. It legally interprets the signature not as consent, but as a cry for help. It automatically voids the document and freezes all assets immediately. A gasp went through the room. Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, pulling a thick, leather-bound book from her briefcase. She opened it to the marked page. "He is right," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "Section 4, Paragraph 1. The document Bradley is holding is not a title deed. It is a confession. By presenting it, he has just proven he coerced a distressed man into signing under duress." Bradley dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing softly on the stage. He looked at his hands, as if they were covered in blood. He looked at Vanessa, but she was already backing away, trying to blend into the shadows. The officer in charge nodded. "That is enough," he said. He moved in fast. He spun Bradley around and slammed him against the podium. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of an empire being cleansed. Another pair of officers grabbed Vanessa as she tried to slip down the stairs. She screamed, kicking and scratching, blaming Bradley, blaming me, blaming everyone but herself. But the steel cuffs snapped shut on her wrists all the same. I watched them being dragged away through the crowd of the people they had tried to impress. They wanted to be the center of attention. Now they were. The cacophony of Bradley's exit faded slowly down the long corridor outside the ballroom. His curses and threats bounced off the marble walls, getting fainter with every step, until finally the heavy oak doors slammed shut, cutting off the noise completely. He was gone. The toxic cloud that had hung over my family and my business for 2 years had been vacuumed out of the room, leaving behind a silence that was ringing in my ears. I shifted my gaze to Marcus Sterling. The corporate raider was standing near the exit, holding a glass of champagne that had gone flat. He did not look angry. He did not look embarrassed. He looked like a man who had brought a knife to a gunfight and knew when to fold. He caught my eye across the room. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, a gesture of respect from one predator to another. And then he turned and slipped out the side door, vanishing like smoke. He knew there would be no sale today. He knew the carcass he wanted to feast on had just stood up and bitten back. But the room was not at peace. The 500 guests were not cheering. They were checking their phones. I could see the panic rippling through the crowd like a virus. The stock price was plummeting in real time. The news of the arrest and the fraud was already hitting the wires. I heard whispers of liquidation and bankruptcy. They looked at me not as a hero, but as the captain of a sinking ship. They were wondering if they should run for the lifeboats. I leaned into the microphone one last time. The feedback whine made them look up. "Do not look at your phones," I commanded. "Look at me." I gripped the sides of the podium, my knuckles white. "You are worried about your dividends. You are worried about the share price. You are right to be worried. The stock will tank tomorrow. The press will tear us apart. We have been poisoned from the inside, and the sickness runs deep." I paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. But a fever burns out. A bone heals stronger than it was before. Today, we are not declaring bankruptcy. We are declaring war on our own mistakes. Hawthorne Logistics is entering a phase of total transparency. We are opening our books to the federal investigators voluntarily. We are recalling every single truck in the fleet for independent inspection. I took a deep breath. And most importantly, we are establishing a victims' compensation fund. We are not going to hide behind lawyers. We are going to pay for every injury, every accident, and every life that was damaged by my son's greed. We are going to make it right, no matter the cost. I raised a hand and beckoned to the back of the room. "Leo, come here." Leo Vasquez hesitated. He looked at Sarah Jenkins, then at the floor. He was a man used to being invisible, used to being the scapegoat. He walked slowly down the aisle, the crowd parting for him with a mixture of curiosity and shame. He climbed the stairs to the stage. He stood next to me, a giant in a waiter's jacket, towering over the room. "This man lost 2 years of his life," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "He lost his reputation. He lost his freedom. He is the first name on the ledger. We start rebuilding this company by rebuilding him. The era of Bradley is over." The era of accountability begins now. The heavy velvet curtains that had turned the executive office into a crypt for the last 2 years were gone. In their place, sheer linen drapes danced in the breeze coming off the lake, letting the morning sun flood the room with a brilliant, blinding gold. For the first time in a decade, the air did not smell of old paper and stagnant ambition. It smelled of lemon polish and fresh coffee. I sat behind the massive mahogany desk, but I was not hiding behind it anymore. I was working. The silence of the room was comfortable now, not oppressive. The door opened, and a mountain of a man walked in. Leo Vasquez looked uncomfortable in his new skin. The navy blue suit we had tailored for him strained slightly across his broad shoulders, and he kept tugging at his silk tie as if it were a choke collar. But when he walked, he did not shuffle like a prisoner. He walked with the heavy, confident stride of a man who carried authority. He was no longer inmate number 726. He was the director of safety operations. He dropped a thick binder onto my desk. "The fleet inspection is complete," Gerald Leo rumbled, his voice filling the room. "We grounded 40% of the trucks. The mechanics are working triple shifts to replace the brake lines and the rotors. It is going to cost a fortune in overtime." I looked at the numbers. The cost was staggering. In the old days, I would have fired someone for bringing me a bill this high. Today, I smiled. "Pay it," I said. "If they need more time, give it to them. No truck leaves the yard until you would feel safe putting your own mother in the passenger seat." Leo nodded, a rare smile touching his eyes. "Understood, boss." Behind him, Matilda entered the room. She was not wearing her nurse's uniform. She was wearing a bright floral dress that seemed to defy the gray Chicago winter outside. She was carrying a tray of tea, but her hands were steady. The shadow of fear that had haunted her face for weeks had lifted completely. She set the tray down and placed a framed photograph on the corner of my desk. It was a picture of a young boy holding a baseball bat, grinning at the camera. "The judge signed the final order this morning," Matilda said, her voice thick with emotion. "Full custody. He granted the restraining order for 5 years. My ex-husband cannot come within 1,000 feet of Toby." She looked at me, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry again. "You did that, Gerald. Your affidavit, the lawyers you hired. You saved my family." I looked at the photo of the boy. I had failed my own son so spectacularly that he was currently sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting trial. But I had managed to save hers. It was not a fair trade, but it was a start. "We are a different kind of family now, Matilda," I said softly, picking up my fountain pen. "We are the ones who survived the fire." I pulled the heavy legal document toward me. It was the last piece of business for the day. The header read, "The Hawthorne Victims Compensation Fund." It was a trust endowed with $50 million of my personal fortune. It was not hush money. It was an apology written in ink and sweat. It would pay for surgeries, for therapy, and for the lost wages of every person Bradley had hurt. I uncapped the pen. My hand did not shake. My grip was firm. I signed my name, Gerald Hawthorne, in bold black ink. It was the most expensive signature of my life, and it was the only one that had ever truly mattered. We could have gone anywhere. The stock market had rebounded after my announcement, and the board of directors had offered to rent out the penthouse of the Ritz-Carlton to celebrate my return. They wanted champagne towers and caviar. They wanted to toast the returning hero. But I told the driver to turn left onto 4th Street instead. I told him to pull up to the peeling yellow doors of the St. Mary's Community Center, the same place where I had slept on a cot, shivering under a thin blanket just a few days ago. We sat at a wobbly folding table near the kitchen. The air smelled of boiled cabbage and floor wax, a sharp contrast to the expensive perfume of the ballroom. But to me, it smelled like home. Sarah Jenkins sat to my left, stirring a plastic cup of lukewarm coffee with a wooden stick. She had traded her power suit for a comfortable sweater, and for the first time in 30 years, she looked like a person, not a shark. Across from me sat Leo. The big man was hunched over a bowl of tomato soup, blowing on the steam. He looked out of place in his new suit amidst the homeless and the destitute, but he also looked completely at peace. I dipped a piece of stale bread into my soup. It was the best meal I had eaten in 20 years. It did not taste like guilt. It did not taste like leverage. It tasted like honesty. We ate in silence for a long time. The only sounds, the clinking of plastic spoons and the low murmur of the other residents. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have been to war together and survived. Leo finally put his spoon down. He wiped his mouth with a paper napkin and looked at me. His dark eyes were serious, searching my face for cracks in the armor. "Boss," he said, his voice low. "We won. The company is safe. The fund is set up, but I have to ask." He paused, looking down at his hands, then back up at me. "He is in a cell tonight, Gerald. Your own flesh and blood. Do you feel it? Do you regret what we did?" Sarah stopped stirring her coffee. She looked at me, waiting for the answer. It was the question everyone was afraid to ask. How does a father live with himself after destroying his son? I placed my spoon on the table. I looked out the window at the snowy street where I had wandered alone and confused. I thought about the cold. I thought about the fear. And then I thought about the man who had left me there to die. I sat back in the metal folding chair. It was hard and uncomfortable, but I sat tall. I looked Leo in the eye. "I am not going to lie to you, Leo. A part of me died in that courtroom today. No father wants to see his child in chains. I mourn the boy he used to be. I mourn the child who used to run to me when he scraped his knee." I took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the room fill my lungs. "But that boy died a long time ago, Leo. He was killed by greed. He was killed by entitlement. What I buried today was a monster who hurt people. So yes, I lost a son." I reached across the scratched table. I put one hand on Leo's forearm and the other on Sarah's hand. I felt the warmth of their skin, the solid reality of their presence. I lost a son, but for the first time in my life, I found my dignity. I found out what it means to stand for something other than profit. And looking at you two, looking at the people who risked everything to save a broken old man, I realized something else. I squeezed their hands. I have lost a frantic, ambitious heir, but I have found a family. And that is a trade I would make 1,000 times over. Leo nodded slowly, a small, sad smile touching his lips. Sarah squeezed my hand back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I looked around the room at the peeling paint and the harsh fluorescent lights. I felt a lightness in my chest that I had not felt since I was a young man, starting out with one truck and a dream. I felt clean. I looked back at my friends. The corners of my eyes crinkled. my lips curved upward. Not in the polite, practiced grimace of a CEO, but in a true expression of joy. I smiled. It was a smile that reached all the way to my eyes, bright and unburdened. "Eat your soup," I said softly. "We have a lot of work to do tomorrow." The steam from the soup rose up, curling in the air like a spirit released. The sounds of the shelter faded into a gentle hum. I was Gerald Hawthorne. I was 72 years old, and my life was just beginning. The saga of Gerald Hawthorne serves as a powerful reminder that true legacy is not defined by the wealth we accumulate or the titles we hold, but by the integrity we maintain when the world isn't watching. It teaches us that family is not always a bond of blood. Often, it is found in the loyalty of those who stand by us in our darkest hours. Most importantly, Gerald's resurrection proves that it is never too late for redemption. No matter how broken or underestimated you may feel, you always possess the inner strength to stand up, speak the truth, and choose justice over convenience. If Gerald's fight for dignity inspired you, leave a comment below sharing what true success means to you, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice.